There was a young man named Amin who lived on the outskirts of the city in a wooden cabin that barely withstood the storms. Every morning he would wake up before dawn, walk 2 hours to the center, and stand by the main fountain, hoping someone would offer him a job, any job. But the days passed, and no one looked at him. The coins in his pocket had disappeared weeks ago, and hunger was beginning to be a constant companion. That morning, like every morning, Amin arrived at the plaza hoping something would change. He sat on the edge of the fountain, watching the merchants shouting their offers, the children running between the stalls, the women haggling over the price of fabrics. Everything seemed normal, until a murmur began to spread through the plaza like an invisible wave. Conversations died out. The merchants stopped shouting. The children stopped dead in their tracks. And then everyone began to move away, some walking quickly, others directly running toward the side streets. Amin stood up, confused. What was happening? He saw no fire, heard no alarm cries. There were no soldiers, just that strange silence that had taken over the place. He turned his head in all directions, trying to understand, and that's when he saw it. A black carriage, pulled by 4 black horses, slowly advancing along the cobblestone path. The driver wore a dark coat and a hat that concealed his face. But the most disturbing thing wasn't the carriage, but the people's reaction. It was as if everyone knew something that Amin didn't. The carriage stopped right in front of him, the door opened with a creak, and from inside descended a tall man, about 50 years old, with hair perfectly combed back and an impeccable suit. His face had no expression whatsoever, as if it were carved in stone. He approached Amin with slow steps, studying him with his gaze. "Why didn't you flee like the others?" asked the man with a deep and calm voice. Amin swallowed. "I don't know why they should flee from you, sir. I'm just looking for work." The man smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Work, you say? How convenient. I'm just looking for someone to help me with a delicate matter. Someone strong, young, willing to follow instructions." Amin felt a chill, but also a spark of hope. "What kind of work, sir?" "You'll find out when we get there. But I'll pay you well, very well. More than you'd earn in an entire year working in this plaza." The man extended his hand toward the carriage. "Are you coming or not?" Amin looked around. The plaza was almost empty. The few who remained watched him from afar, with expressions of pity. Something inside him told him not to get into that carriage, but hunger, desperation, and the promise of money were stronger. He nodded and got in. The interior of the carriage was luxurious, with red velvet seats and crystal lamps hanging from the ceiling. The man sat across from him and knocked twice on the ceiling. The carriage began to move, leaving the city behind. During the journey, Amin tried to start a conversation, but the man responded with monosyllables or simply ignored him. He looked out the window with an absent expression, as if he were thinking about something completely different. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the carriage stopped. When Amin got out, he was left speechless. Before him rose an enormous mansion, with white columns, perfectly manicured gardens, and a fountain in the center of the courtyard. It was like something out of a fairy tale. The man walked toward the entrance without saying a word, and Amin followed him. Inside, everything was even more impressive. Marble floors, golden chandeliers, paintings on the walls that seemed to watch you. The man gestured with his hand, and 2 servants appeared carrying trays of food. "Eat, rest. Tomorrow you'll begin your work." Amin sat at the table and began to eat. It had been so long since he'd tasted anything like this that he almost forgot where he was. As he ate, he heard soft footsteps approaching. He looked up and saw a young woman, perhaps a couple of years younger than him, with dark hair tied in a braid and eyes that seemed to carry an ancient sadness. She sat silently on the other side of the table and began to eat as well, but without looking up. "Who is she?" Amin asked the man. My niece, the man replied without flinching. She's lived with me since her parents died. The young woman said nothing, but Amin noticed how her hands trembled slightly as she held the fork. Something wasn't right. He could feel it. After dinner, the man showed him a room where he could sleep. Rest. We'll leave early tomorrow. And he left, closing the door behind him. Amin lay down on the bed, but couldn't sleep. All of this was too strange. Why did people flee when they saw that man? Why did the young woman seem so sad? What kind of work required so much mystery? He was about to fall asleep when he heard a soft knock on the door. He sat up immediately. Who is it? The door opened slowly, and the young woman entered. She was carrying something wrapped in a cloth. She approached the bed and handed it to him without saying a word. "What is this?" asked Amin, unwrapping it. Inside was a small mirror with a silver frame and a handwritten note that said, "When you're in danger, break it." Amin looked up at her. "I don't understand. Why are you giving me this?" The young woman looked at him with eyes full of tears. "Because I know where he'll take you tomorrow, and I know you won't come back unless you use this." "What are you talking about? What's going to happen tomorrow?" She shook her head. "I can't tell you more. Just don't drink anything he offers you. And if you do, break the mirror." Before Amin could ask more questions, she left the room as silently as she had entered. Amin didn't sleep that night. At dawn, the man entered his room. "It's time, let's go." They got into the carriage again and traveled for hours, entering an arid and desolate territory. Finally, they stopped at the foot of a rocky and arid mountain that rose imposingly toward the sky. The man got out of the carriage and signaled Amin to follow him. "This is where you'll work," said the man, pointing to the mountain. "At the top of that mountain there's a cave full of precious stones. Your job is to climb up, collect as many as you can, and bring them to me." Amin looked up. The mountain was steep, dangerous. "And how am I supposed to come down with the stones?" "That's your concern, not mine." The man pulled out a canteen from his coat. "Here, drink water before you climb. You'll need it." Amin remembered the young woman's words. "Don't drink anything he offers you." But the man was staring at him, waiting. Amin took the canteen, pretended to drink, but barely wet his lips. "Thank you," he said, returning it. The man frowned, but said nothing. "Climb. I'll wait here." Amin began to climb. The rock was hot under his hands, and the sun beat down mercilessly. Each step was an effort, but he kept going. When he finally reached the top, he found the cave the man had mentioned. He entered and, indeed, there were shining stones everywhere. But something didn't make sense. Why didn't the man climb himself? Why did he need someone else? If you're wondering what's going to happen now, follow the story to the end. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it now so you don't miss any details. Amin filled a bag with the stones and returned to the edge of the summit. "I have the stones!" he shouted down. The man looked at him from below. "Perfect, now throw them to me." Amin began to throw the stones one by one. The man collected them with a smile that grew with each stone that fell. When the bag was empty, Amin shouted, "I'm done. How do I get down?" The man looked at him for a long moment. And then he laughed. A cold, cruel laugh. "You don't come down. That's the deal. Thanks for your service." And without saying more, he got into the carriage and drove away. Amin was paralyzed. He couldn't believe it. He was trapped at the top of a mountain, without water, without food, without a way down. He looked around desperately. The sun was beginning to set, and soon it would be completely dark. Then he remembered the mirror. He took it out of his pocket and held it with trembling hands. "I don't know if this will work, but I have no other choice." And he broke it against a rock. Immediately, a thick fog began to form around him. From that fog emerged a figure, tall and ethereal, with eyes that shone like stars. "You have freed me," said the figure with a voice that resonated like the wind. "In return, I will grant you one wish." Amin didn't waste time. "I want to get down from this mountain." The figure nodded. "So be it." And in an instant, Amin found himself standing at the foot of the mountain, safe and sound. But he had no intention of returning to his cabin. He had to go back to that mansion. He had to understand what was happening, and he had to help that young woman. He walked all night, guiding himself by the stars, until finally, at dawn, he saw the mansion in the distance. He hid among the bushes and waited. It wasn't long before the carriage left again, with the man inside. He waited until it drove away, and then ran toward the mansion. The young woman was in the garden, watering the flowers. When she saw him, she dropped the watering can. You're alive, thanks to you," said Amin. "But I need you to tell me the truth. What's happening here?" She looked toward the mansion, making sure no one else was nearby, and then began to speak. "That man isn't my uncle. He's my husband. He forced me to marry him 2 years ago, after he killed my brother." Amin felt the air escape from his lungs. "What?" "My brother and I were orphans. One day, that man appeared in the plaza, just like he did with you. He offered my brother work. I insisted on going with him because I didn't want to be left alone. He brought us here, and the next day he took my brother to that mountain. He never came back. The man told me he had an accident, but I knew it was a lie. He threatened me, told me that if I didn't marry him, he'd kill me too. So I agreed, because I had no other choice." "And the others?" asked Amin. "How many has he?" "I don't know exactly, but I've seen many young people enter this house and never leave. He tells them all the same thing. He offers them work, takes them to the mountain, and abandons them there. He uses the precious stones to become richer. And no one stops him because no one knows what he does." Amin clenched his fists. "Well, I'm going to stop him." "How?" she asked desperately. "He's powerful. He has connections. No one believes poor people like us. Then we'll do it our way." Amin looked toward the horizon. "When does he come back?" "Usually in the afternoon. He brings another young person almost every week." "Perfect. Then we have time." Over the next few hours, Amin and the young woman, who told him her name was Layla, carefully planned. When the man returned with his next victim, Amin would be waiting. Just as Layla had predicted, the man returned at dusk. He brought with him a boy no more than 17 years old, with a fragile and frightened appearance. Amin watched them from a second-floor window. The man and the boy dined together, just as Amin had done. Layla served the food in silence, casting quick glances toward the window where she knew Amin was hiding. The next day, early in the morning, the man and the boy left in the carriage. Amin waited a few minutes and then ran out of the mansion. He knew the way now. He knew exactly where they were headed. He ran faster than he had ever run in his life, taking shortcuts through the field, jumping over rocks and bushes. He reached the mountain before the carriage and hid behind a rock formation. The carriage arrived shortly after. The man and the boy got out. The man pulled out the canteen, just as he had done with Amin. "Drink before you climb." The boy, innocent and trusting, drank without hesitation. Within seconds, his eyes began to close. He staggered and fell to the ground, unconscious. The man smiled with satisfaction. Then, out of nowhere, 2 enormous birds appeared, with sharp claws and curved beaks. They grabbed the boy by the arms and began to fly toward the top of the mountain. Amin watched everything horrified. That's how he did it. He drugged them so they couldn't resist. But this time would be different. When the man turned around to get into the carriage, Amin came out of his hiding place. "Hello again." The man turned abruptly, his eyes wide open with surprise. "You? But how?" "Surprised to see me alive?" Amin walked toward him slowly. I suppose you didn't count on anyone being able to escape your trap." The man backed away, searching for something in his coat, probably a weapon. But Amin was faster. He pushed him against the carriage and snatched the canteen from him. "What did you put in the water?" The man didn't respond. Amin stared at him. "If you don't tell me, I'll make you drink your own medicine." Okay, shouted the man. "It's a sedative. It only puts them to sleep for a few hours. It doesn't kill them. No, you kill them by leaving them to die of hunger and thirst at the top of that mountain." Amin uncapped the canteen. "Now, drink." The man tried to resist, but Amin was stronger. He held him by the head and forced him to drink. Within seconds, the man began to stagger. His eyes closed and he fell to the ground, unconscious. The birds appeared again, as if they had been waiting. They grabbed the man by the arms and carried him flying toward the top of the mountain. Amin took a deep breath. Now he had to rescue the boy. He began to climb again, this time with more urgency. When he reached the top, he found the boy still unconscious, but breathing. He carried him on his shoulders and began the descent. It was slow, exhausting, but they finally made it down. The boy woke up shortly after, confused. "What happened? Where am I?" Amin explained everything. The boy paled. "I almost died, but you didn't. Now go home and never come back here." The boy nodded and ran away. Amin looked toward the top of the mountain. From there, he could hear the man's screams, asking for help. But Amin felt no compassion. That man had condemned so many others to that same fate. He returned to the mansion. Layla was waiting for him at the door with tears in her eyes. "Did you do it?" "Yes. He won't hurt anyone anymore." Layla hugged him, crying with relief. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to thank me. Just, what will you do now?" Layla looked toward the mansion. "This house is full of riches that he stole. I think they should go to the people who really need them." Amin smiled. "I agree." Over the following weeks, Amin and Layla sold everything in the mansion and distributed the money among the poor families of the city. The news spread quickly, and people began to see Amin as a hero. Over time, Amin and Layla fell in love. They got married in a simple ceremony, surrounded by the people they had helped, and although they were never rich again, they lived happily, knowing they had done the right thing. If you made it this far and want to keep enjoying stories like this, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any new videos. In times when a man's word was worth more than any signed document, there lived a judge named Malik, whose fame transcended the borders of his city to become legend. It wasn't his imposing figure or authoritative voice that distinguished him from other magistrates, but something far more powerful. A mind capable of unraveling the truth where others saw only confusion. People traveled for days just to present their cases before him, trusting that his sagacity would reveal what remained hidden. 3 cases, in particular, solidified his reputation as the most brilliant judge of his era. 3 stories that are still told today to remind us that true justice doesn't depend on papers or seals, but on the ability to see beyond appearances. The case of the stolen gold. The first of these stories began on a hot afternoon when a cloth merchant named Hamid arrived at the court with his face marked by desperation. For years, Hamid had worked honestly in the market, earning the trust of his customers and the respect of his neighbors. He had a partner named Rashid, a man who had arrived at his shop years earlier seeking employment. Hamid, kind-hearted, not only gave him work but over time made him his partner, sharing the business profits equally. Rashid always showed gratitude and loyalty, or at least so it seemed on the surface. One day, Hamid decided to expand his business. He had saved 1,000 gold coins over the years, a considerable fortune that represented his life's work. He needed to travel to a distant city to acquire exotic fabrics that no other merchant in his region offered. The journey was long and dangerous, plagued by bandits lurking on the roads. Hamid didn't want to risk carrying such a large amount of money with him, so he made a decision that seemed logical. He entrusted the 1,000 gold coins to his partner Rashid to keep them safe until his return. Before departing, both men met in the fabric warehouse, surrounded by the rolls of silk and cotton they had sold together for years. Hamid took out a heavy leather bag where the coins jingled. Rashid took it with both hands and solemnly promised to guard that money as if it were his own. There were no witnesses present, only the two partners and the trust they had built over time. Hamid departed peacefully, convinced that his money was in good hands. The journey lasted 3 full months. Hamid faced sandstorms, difficult negotiations, and the exhaustion of traveling endless roads under the relentless Sunday. But finally he returned victorious, with fabrics so beautiful he knew his investment would be worth every coin spent. The first thing he did upon arriving was seek out Rashid to recover his money and begin selling the new merchandise. When he entered the shop, Rashid received him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Hamid, suspecting nothing, directly asked him to return the 1,000 gold coins. Rashid's expression changed immediately. His eyebrows furrowed in a perfectly acted mixture of confusion and offense. With a firm voice and direct gaze, Rashid denied ever receiving that money. He said Hamid must be confused, that perhaps the long journey under the sun had affected his memory. He even dared to suggest that maybe Hamid had lost the money on the road and was now looking to blame someone else. Hamid felt as if the ground was opening beneath his feet. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He tried to reason with Rashid, reminded him of the exact day he gave him the money, described the leather bag, mentioned every detail of that conversation. But Rashid remained firm in his denial, crossing his arms and raising his voice so other merchants in the market could hear his version of events. Some began to murmur, doubting Hamid's word. Devastated but not defeated, Hamid decided to go to Judge Malik. He had heard stories about his legendary ability to discover the truth, and now his last hope depended on that reputation. When he arrived at the court and presented his case, Judge Malik listened with absolute attention, without interrupting, observing not only the words but also the gestures and pauses of Hamid. Malik immediately summoned Rashid. When he arrived, he maintained a confident, almost defiant posture. He knew there was no proof, no witnesses, no document that could incriminate him. In his mind, he had won before the trial even began. Judge Malik looked at both men and spoke with a calm but penetrating voice. He asked Rashid if it was true that Hamid had entrusted him with 1,000 gold coins. Rashid categorically denied it, repeating his story with the same conviction he had shown in the market. Malik nodded thoughtfully and then addressed Hamid, asking if he had any witness or written proof. Hamid, with a voice broken by frustration, admitted there was nothing of the sort, that everything had been based on mutual trust. The judge leaned back in his seat, stroking his long beard while his eyes shone with a particular gleam. After a silence that seemed eternal, he spoke directly to Hamid with a strange instruction. He must go to the exact place where he had given Rashid the money and bring back a handful of dirt from that specific site. Hamid looked at him bewildered, not understanding what a handful of dirt could prove, but the judge's tone admitted no discussion. He stood up and quickly left toward the fabric warehouse. Rashid remained in the hall, now alone before Judge Malik. The minutes passed slowly. The hall was silent, only interrupted by the occasional sound of footsteps outside. Malik seemed absorbed in his thoughts, but in reality, he was executing his plan with surgical precision. Suddenly, after a considerable time, Malik raised his gaze toward Rashid and asked in a casual, almost disinterested tone, "Your former partner is taking too long." Do you happen to know why he hasn't returned yet? It was an apparently innocent question, asked with the naturalness of someone simply making conversation to fill the silence. Rashid, who had been nervous about the wait, but confident that there was no way to prove anything against him, responded without thinking. It's because the warehouse where we worked is on the other side of the city. He must be walking back with that dirt you asked him to bring. The words came out of his mouth before his brain processed what he was saying. Judge Malik's face lit up with a barely perceptible smile. His eyes, which moments before seemed distracted, now shone with the intensity of someone who had just confirmed a suspicion. He leaned forward and with a firm voice declared, "You have just confessed your crime with your own words, Rashid." Rashid instantly turned pale. His hands began to tremble. "How? How do you say that, my lord? I haven't confessed anything." His voice now sounded high-pitched, desperate. Malik explained with devastating calm. "If you truly never received that money, if Hamid were lying as you claim, you would have no way of knowing where he went to look for that dirt. You wouldn't know the place is on the other side of the city, nor would you know how long it should take to get there. But you know perfectly well, because that warehouse is exactly the place where you received the 1,000 gold coins that you now deny having taken. Your own knowledge of the site has betrayed you." The silence that followed was crushing. Rashid tried to stammer an explanation, but the words got tangled in his throat. He knew he had fallen into a perfect trap, built not with lies but with his own involuntary truth. Malik ordered that Rashid be detained until he returned every one of the 1,000 gold coins he had stolen. When Hamid returned with the handful of dirt, he found justice where before there had been only despair. The case of nothing. The second story that elevated Judge Malik to legend occurred a few weeks later and began in the most unusual way. An elderly farmer named Yusuf arrived at the court almost dragging himself, exhausted and confused. Yusuf lived in a small nearby village where he cultivated his own vegetables and raised some chickens. He wasn't rich, but he didn't lack what was necessary to live with dignity. That day, Yusuf had gone to the market to sell a dozen fresh eggs. With the money earned, he bought a large sack of flour, the heaviest thing he had carried in months. The merchant who sold it to him, seeing the old man's age, had the kindness to help him place the sack on the back of his donkey. Yusuf thanked him for the gesture, mounted with difficulty, and began the journey back to his house, which was an hour away along a dusty path. The donkey walked with a slow but steady pace, and Yusuf was thinking about the bread his wife would bake with that flour when they arrived. But halfway along the road, the donkey stumbled on a stone. It wasn't a serious fall. The animal quickly recovered its balance, but the sudden movement caused the flour sack to slide and fall to the ground with a dull thud that raised a small white cloud. Yusuf dismounted carefully and looked at the sack with concern. It wasn't broken, the flour was still well contained, but the problem was that he alone didn't have the strength to lift it and place it back on the donkey. His old arms trembled just thinking about it. He stood there, looking at the sack, then at the donkey, feeling the helplessness of age. Just at that moment, a strong young man was passing along the same road. He was tall, with muscular arms, with the typical arrogance of someone who knows his youth gives him an advantage over others. He stopped upon seeing the scene and with a mocking tone asked, "What are you doing standing there like a dry tree, old man? Are you waiting for the sack to lift itself?" Yusuf, accustomed to the kinder manners of his village, explained his situation with patience. "Young man, I'm coming from the market with this sack of flour, but the donkey stumbled, and now I don't have the strength to lift it. It would be very helpful if you could assist me." The young man approached, inspected the sack, and then looked at Yusuf with a crooked smile. "Of course I can lift it. For me it's like lifting a feather. But tell me, old man, what will you give me in exchange for my help?" Yusuf checked his pockets. He only had a few coins left, barely enough to buy salt the following week. He shook his head honestly. "I have nothing to offer you, son, but if you help me, I'll thank you with all my heart and my prayers." The young man let out a short laugh. "I don't need your prayers, old man." And without waiting for another response, he lifted the sack with impressive ease and placed it firmly on the donkey's back. Yusuf began to thank him profusely, but when he tried to mount to continue his journey, the young man stopped him by grabbing his arm. "Wait a moment. Where do you think you're going?" Yusuf looked at him confused. "Well, to my house, young man. You already helped me. Thank you very much." "Not so fast," said the young man, crossing his arms. "When I asked you what you would give me in exchange, you said nothing. And that is exactly what I want now. I want that nothing you promised me." Yusuf blinked several times. Sure, he had heard wrong. "I don't understand, son. How can I give you nothing?" "The word means there's nothing to give." The young man deliberately raised his voice. "I don't care what it means. You promised me nothing, and I demand that you deliver it to me right now. A promise is a promise, and you, old man, cannot leave without keeping your word." Yusuf tried to reason with him, explain that there was a misunderstanding, that the expression was just a way of saying he had nothing material to offer. But the young man remained inflexible. He even began to raise his voice more, attracting the attention of some travelers passing by. Some stopped to observe, but no one intervened, unsure of who was right in such an absurd dispute. Finally, exhausted and not knowing what else to do, Yusuf agreed to go with the young man to Judge Malik's court to resolve this incomprehensible matter. When both presented themselves before Malik and told their versions of the story, a murmur of disbelief ran through the hall. Some attendees smiled, thinking it was a joke, but the young man's serious face made it clear he was completely serious. Judge Malik listened to everything without showing any emotion. When they finished, he looked directly at Yusuf and asked, "Is it true that you told this young man you had nothing to give him?" Yusuf nodded, embarrassed to be there over such nonsense. Then Malik addressed the young man. "And you insist on receiving that nothing the old man mentioned?" The young man lifted his chin proudly. "That's right, Your Honor. A man must keep his word." Malik leaned back in his seat, and those who knew him well noticed that particular gleam in his eyes that always preceded a brilliant solution. After a moment, he gestured to one of his guards. "Bring the old man's donkey here to the hall with the flour sack still on its back." The murmuring in the hall intensified. No one understood what the judge intended. The guard left and returned minutes later, guiding the donkey, which entered the judicial hall, looking with large, confused eyes at all the people gathered. The flour sack remained firmly tied to its back. Malik stood up and walked around the donkey, observing it with a serious expression, as if the animal were a key piece of evidence. Then he stopped in front of the young man and spoke in an authoritative tone. "Young man, you have come here demanding to receive what was promised to you. Very well. You will have exactly that. But first, you must repeat the action for which you were offered that reward. Lower the flour sack from the donkey and place it on the ground." The young man, confused but still confident, approached the donkey. With his strong arms, he untied the sack and lowered it easily, placing it on the stone floor of the hall with a dull sound. "Good," continued Malik. "Now lift that sack again and place it on the donkey's back, just as you did on the road." The young man obeyed, lifting the sack without apparent effort and placing it back on the donkey, adjusting the rope so it would be securely fastened. When he finished, Malik asked, with a clear voice that resonated throughout the hall, "Tell me, young man, when you lifted the sack from the ground and placed it on the donkey, what did you find beneath it?" The young man looked at the place where the sack had been, then looked at the judge, and finally responded with an uncertain voice, "Nothing, Your Honor." There was nothing under the sack. A smile appeared on Judge Malik's face. Exactly, there was nothing. And that, young man, is precisely what the old man promised you and what you have just received. You took nothing from the ground when you lifted that sack, and that nothing is yours to take with you. The debt is settled. The hall burst into laughter. The young man stood open-mouthed, his face reddening as he understood he had been defeated by his own absurd logic. He couldn't argue anything because the judge had taken his demand literally and returned it to him in the same way. Humiliated but unable to protest, the young man left the court while Yusuf recovered his donkey and his flour, thanking the judge infinitely for his wisdom. The case of the three brothers. But it was the third and final story that truly consolidated Judge Malik's legend, because it involved not only ingenuity, but also a deep understanding of the human heart. This story began when three brothers arrived at the court with a document that had them completely baffled. The three brothers were named Omar, the eldest at 40 years old, a spice merchant with a calm temperament. Then there was Omar, the middle one, 35 years old, a master carpenter known for his honesty. And finally, Omar, the youngest, 30 years old, who had studied law in a distant city and had recently returned to live near his brothers. Yes, all three shared the same name, a decision made by their father for reasons no one clearly remembered. Their father, a wealthy man who had built a considerable fortune through silk trading, had recently passed away. He was a peculiar man, with a sharp mind but eccentric behaviors that bewildered those who knew him. Before dying, he had written his will in his own hand, and upon opening it, the three brothers found a statement that left them completely perplexed. The will simply said, "Omar will inherit everything. Omar will inherit everything. Omar will inherit nothing." The three brothers read and reread those lines dozens of times. How could it be that all three would inherit everything, and at the same time one of them would inherit nothing? Which of the three did the last sentence refer to? The confusion quickly transformed into tension. Although all three loved each other as brothers, the will's ambiguity began to sow doubts. The eldest brother suggested that perhaps the last line was an error, that the father had written twice that both older ones would inherit, and simply added a contradictory line due to senile confusion. The middle brother argued that maybe the father was referring to birth order, first and second yes, third no. But the youngest brother, who had studied law, insisted that the document must be interpreted literally and that there was something deeper in those words. After days of debates that led nowhere, all three decided to go to Judge Malik, bringing the original will with them. When they presented themselves before him and explained their dilemma, Malik took the document in his hands and studied it in silence for a long while. His fingers traced the words, as if they could read something invisible between the lines. Finally, he raised his gaze and observed the three brothers with that penetrating look that characterized his moments of greatest concentration. A suspicion had begun to form in his mind, a possibility that would perfectly explain the strange wording of the will. But he needed to be sure, completely sure, before pronouncing judgment. He addressed his guards with an instruction that surprised everyone in the hall. "Take these three brothers to separate rooms. I want to speak with each of them individually, one by one, without the others hearing the conversation." The brothers looked at each other with concern but nodded. The guard first took away the youngest and middle brothers, leaving the eldest alone before Judge Malik. The hall fell silent, just the two men looking at each other. Malik spoke with a soft but serious voice. "Omar, I have reflected deeply on your father's will, and the only way to resolve this situation is to verify that the document is authentic. For this, we would need to exhume your father's body and compare his signature with other documents he wrote during his lifetime. I know it's an extreme measure, but it's the only way to be absolutely sure that this will wasn't altered or forged. Would you be willing to authorize this?" The eldest brother's face immediately contracted in an expression of absolute horror. He shook his head violently. "No, my lord, absolutely not. I cannot allow you to desecrate my father's grave. He deserves to rest in peace. No matter how much money is at stake, I could never live with myself knowing I disturbed his eternal rest out of greed. I renounce any inheritance. Let my brothers keep everything, but please leave my father in peace." Malik nodded slowly, his eyes shining with something like satisfaction. "I understand your position, Omar. You may leave and wait outside." The eldest brother left the hall with slumped shoulders but with a calm expression, like someone who has just made a difficult but correct decision. The guard then brought in the middle brother. Malik repeated exactly the same question, using the same words, carefully observing every reaction of the second Omar, and the response was practically identical to the first. The middle brother, with tears forming in his eyes, categorically rejected the idea of exhuming his father. "My lord," he said with a broken voice, "my father taught me that there are things more important than money. Respect for the dead, family dignity, peace of conscience. I will not participate in something like this. Let whoever it is take the inheritance, but my father will not be touched." Malik dismissed him with an understanding gesture and finally summoned the youngest brother, the one who had studied law. He entered with a confident step, adjusting his tunic with an almost professional gesture. When Malik posed the same question about exhuming the father's body, the youngest brother took a few seconds to think, but his response was completely different. "My lord," he began in a calculated tone, "I understand it's an unpleasant measure, but if it's necessary to resolve this legal dispute definitively, then it must be done. The living have rights that must be protected, and if exhuming the body is the only path to establish the truth and avoid future conflicts, then I accept that it proceed. After all, my father no longer feels anything, and it's the living who must deal with the consequences of these matters." Malik leaned back in his seat, and an expression of deep understanding appeared on his face. Now he had the answer he was seeking. He summoned the three brothers to reunite before him. When all three were standing, awaiting the judge's decision, Malik spoke with a firm voice that resonated throughout the hall. "I have discovered the meaning of your father's will. When he wrote, 'Omar will inherit everything,' Omar will inherit everything. Omar will inherit nothing. He wasn't confused or senile. He was being perfectly clear for whoever could see beyond the words." The three brothers leaned forward, holding their breath. "Your father knew something you didn't know," Malik continued. "He knew that one of you was not really his son, and he found a way to reveal it without causing unnecessary scandal during his lifetime, letting the truth emerge after his death." An absolute silence fell over the hall. The three brothers looked at each other with expressions of shock. Malik pointed to the youngest brother. "You, the youngest, have demonstrated with your response that you don't share the sacred bond that a true son feels toward his father." Your brothers, without hesitating for a second, rejected the idea of desecrating the grave of the one who gave them life. They were willing to lose an entire fortune before disrespecting their dead father. But you, on the other hand, coldly calculated that the living matter more than the dead, that money justifies any action. That is not the reaction of a true son. The youngest brother turned pale. He tried to protest, but the words wouldn't come out of his mouth. "Therefore," proclaimed Malik, standing from his seat, "I declare that the first two Omars will inherit everything in equal parts, and the third Omar will inherit nothing, just as the will established. Your father knew you better than you yourselves thought." Later, the complete truth became known. The father of the three brothers had had an affair with another woman years before, and the youngest son was the fruit of that relationship, something the father always knew but never revealed publicly, to avoid destroying his family. However, when writing his will, He couldn't let that secret alter justice, and found an ingenious way to reveal the truth without having to declare it directly. The two eldest brothers received their inheritance, and although the revelation was painful, they understood that their father had acted with a wisdom that went beyond the obvious. The youngest brother, humiliated and unmasked, left the city shortly after. The legacy of Judge Malik. The story of Judge Malik spread like wildfire through dry grass throughout the region. Merchants, farmers, nobles, and even other judges began to speak of him with reverent admiration. It wasn't just his intelligence that made him special, but his ability to understand human nature in its deepest form. He knew that liars betray themselves when they lower their guard, that the abusive can be defeated with their own logic, and that true bonds of the heart are revealed in moments of trial. Over time, Malik became more than a judge. He became a symbol that true justice doesn't need armies or threats, only a clear mind that can see through appearances. His cases were studied in law schools, told in homes as moral lessons, and his name endured generation after generation as an example of what a human being can achieve when combining intelligence with integrity. People learned that before a judge like Malik, no lie was sufficiently well constructed, no trap was subtle enough, and no injustice could hide behind legal tricks. Because he didn't judge only with laws written on ancient parchments, but with that higher law written in the human heart. The difference between good and evil, between truth and falsehood,